Know, O prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis, and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of.
All right, welcome to World of Conan, and today we're talking with the brothers.
All right, welcome to World of Conan, and today we're
feedback.
talking with the brothers. All right, welcome to World of Conan, and today we're talking with the brothers. All right, welcome to World of Conan, and today we're talking with the brothers.
sorry.
All right, welcome to World of Conan.
What's happening here?
Today we're
I got no
talking
idea.
with the brothers. All right, welcome to World of Conan.
It's coming from your end. Yeah. I had to mute you. I don't know what was. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties. Let me see if there's anything over here. No, that's okay. Okay, is it good now?
Yeah, seems to be.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, is it good now?
No,
Nope.
no.
Yeah,
That's my end.
Yeah, I think so.
We've never had difficulties like that before.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah. All right.
We've never had difficulties like that before.
Try closing your Discord.
Yeah, that was weird.
Close your Discord.
Yeah. All right. We've never had difficulties like that before.
Try closing your Discord.
I did.
Yeah, that was weird.
Close your.
I did. Give us a minute, guys. We're having some problems. It's a bit hard to hear if it loops everything. So obviously we're trying to fix that so we can actually talk about the book. But stay around, guys, and we should have this sorted quickly. And we'll talk about the Crown of Blood. Anyone else want to know more about it? Excited about it? I think it looks really good.
Okay, good. I'm back.
I'm already on a roll.
Well, thanks. Actually, real quick before we start, that was a great new intro.
No, it's an old one.
Oh, well, I still liked it.
Oh, yeah, it's good. All right. So, like I was saying before we got interrupted by technical difficulties, yes, we're here. All our great barbarian friends, fantasy friends from all over the YouTubes, from the Tolkien sphere, the Hyborian sphere, wherever you want to be from, and but no pics, please. We're trying to be respectable over here. So I'm joined by Brothers Hyborian, Brothers Krynn. They go by many different names, but they are also known as Joe and Dan. Chaput, I think, is the last name.
Yeah, it's French.
On the book cover. Chaput.
Yeah, because in French, the T is often silent.
Yes.
Or we over abuse the T.
Yeah.
Well, there's an old joke from when I was teaching French a while back. It was, I don't want to get canceled, but you treat your T's and your R's like you treat your women. You either abuse them or you treat them delicately.
Yeah.
Although
So-
that would probably get me in trouble.
Jokes. So we're talking about The Crown of Blonde. It didn't. It was released. What was it? Last month, I think.
Yep.
At the end, last month. Yeah. And actually, it was. It's actually an anthology, right? With many short stories, right? Right. Because I don't know, for some reason, I skipped the anthology word when I was reading the preface for the book in the beginning. I was like, "Wait, what? Oh, it's an anthology. Oh, right." I don't know why how I skipped that.
To be honest, I don't usually write anthologies very often. Anyone who follows me on Substack will know I'm writing mostly novels these days, serially.
Right.
I'm trying to follow in the footsteps of the likes of the great Robert E. Howard and Mark Twain in that regard, as well as Alex Dumas. But the trouble is, this is actually the appendixes, or the first part of the appendixes to a larger novel, which is more like a Scottish Lord of the Rings. But the trouble is, the appendixes kept stretching and stretching and stretching out, and then I rewrote them into. Well, I started rewriting some of them into short stories, and then Dan wanted in, and we then developed this into a full-length book. So the first story is set up right before the civil wars that tear apart Caledonia, which is another term for Scotland. But this is a fantasy version of Caledonia. But the thing is, the first story features that with Mel Martin, and it ends with Simon, the Thistle King. So you've got a huge number of monarchs, a long number of them, who are fighting for what is essentially a bloody crown.
Right.
The book was also inspired by Richard II, one of my favorite plays from Shakespeare, when he says, "Let us sit upon the ground and tell sad tales of the death of kings." That entire soliloquy, which this is one of my favorite parts that Shakespeare ever wrote, and it's really. Let me see if I can find it. It's really an awesome quote. And it was used for the Hollow Crown series of plays, which saw like Jeremy Irons in them. And they were played by the BBC back when the BBC was still somewhat good. But the thing is, here it is. "For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground." And this is Richard II talking. "And tell sad stories of the death of kings, how some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed, all murdered. For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court, and there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning on his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little scene, to monarch of the size, be feared and kill with looks." And that's really one of the best soliloquies, I think, that Shakespeare ever wrote.
Right. Yeah, I can see you have scenes from Richard in almost every story here, I think, right? Before they start.
Yep.
You have,
they're meant to hint at what's to come.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
Instead
go ahead.
Instead of using a prophecy or something like other fantasy writers would,
Right.
I decided to go back to Shakespeare because in some ways he's when it starts, and use his quotes because they're better than everyone's. Except Tolkien's.
Yeah, I had only time to read the first chapter of the first story, In the Valley of the Dark River. And this story is of it seems like it's chieftains going into war, right?
Yep.
They're talking around the fireplace or whatever you want to say.
They're talking about how easy this battle's going to be. It's going to be easy. How could they lose? Never a good sign of confidence.
Yeah.
Now, the idea was when I wrote it was this is just a prelude to the actual
Right.
story. But it's basically, you know, those scenes when you've got those generals and chieftains that serve Kull and Conan, how they always say, well, this is going to be easy. And then Kull and Conan say, now hold on. It may not be that easy.
Yeah.
Well, this was, what if Kull and Conan were not present? How would the battle go? Well, it'd be a disaster because they're the only reason there's any victory to be had to a large extent. And I think in a lot of the short stories, and I figured, let's remove Kull and Conan. How would, what would be the scene dynamics? But I did put in a 14-year-old boy who kind of objects and says, well, my dad died on one of these raids or something to that effect. Like,
right.
I don't think this is a good idea. Maybe we ought to wait because they can't keep up that enormous a force in the field. They can't feed it. So we just wait. And this decision is vetoed because he's not king. The king is a fool. And
right.
Mel Martin, his shadow looms over a good chunk of the story. His sons play a large role later in the story. Right. Not in this first story, but in the other ones. And some of the ongoing characters in the story are Ruaidri, the young lad who warns against this attack. His younger brother will be an ongoing character. Ruaidri is to an extent, but he only really features, I think, in 3 stories. Then he's somewhat usurped by his brothers, somewhat. It's complicated. And you've got the sons of Mel Martin. One of them, I think, appears in story number 4 or 5, or is it 3? No, wait, it's number 4, I think. And that's the eldest son. The youngest son will feature across like almost more than half these stories because he's one of the major characters who goes through this entire story. Kenned is his name, and Kenned's going to be a very, very important character. And, well, he's one of the main villains. And you have, in turn, I'm not going to bother hiding from spoilers because most other Iron Age writers and indie writers prefer to hide their spoilers, but I'm new, so like I don't have the advantage of saying, well, I'm going to hide what goes on in my story, and like, oh well, it'll get better later. I don't want to like at this point in my life, like the book's out there. If it interests you, buy it.
Right.
I'll spoil it because, well, my story is pretty cool.
Don't spoil too much. I'm about to read it.
All right, I'll be careful. That story in there, I think. Well, when we sent it through our editor, who's really good, he liked the Black Row Fields. Dan likes the Final Supper because Dan primarily wrote that one. I had very little input in that one. That's story number 2.
Yeah, I can see.
It's about a very, very bad supper. Well,
I mean, it is the final one.
Mostly for a few of the characters present there, their last meal. And it goes through the motions of what leads up to the meal and then what's going on at the meal, with some hinting at what's to come later. Right. And it introduces my favorite character in the story, Simon. But we first see him as a 6 or 7-year-old. So he's only in the background.
I wanted to ask about this world. Is it like a completely new world, or has it kind of like a resemblance to the real world, like the Hyborian Age has? Or
well, I'm gonna answer that. The idea is that it is a secondary world in the same way the Hyborian Age and Middle Earth are. In that, the idea is that I drew inspiration from both Howard and Tolkien with the idea that this would be set in a mythological version of the ancient past, kind of like what those two did. But the world goes through several ages. of course, you have a bit of a mythic and heroic age, then something akin to a Bronze Age, then an Iron Age, and then a Steel Age. And so it goes through these kind of different phases and ages. This book is set in the Steel Age. So it's long after most empires have fallen and collapsed. And so barbarity is kind of reigning supreme. And the kingdoms are all in disarray. They're starting to recover, but then there's been major calamities that keep hitting. There's a lot of inspiration drawn from the Hyborian Age and from Arda. And I even slipped in some references to Howard, more as a gentle nod. One of the Western Isles of Caledonia is called the Isle of Kull.
Nice.
I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
But the Mormare there is called Homer. Or
so is it kind of like
Homer.
the British
I couldn't
islands?
resist that either.
So is it more like the British islands?
Caledonia is Scotland. Norwend is like a second Scotland, like it's to the north of Caledonia. Britia is England, basically. And the Western Isles are, well, the Western Isles. But the Isle of Kull is one of the largest isles there.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask, you should have put a map in this.
I do have a map.
Maps.
I'll have to basically go back in and edit and add it in.
Yeah, because it just helps, with the world building. You kind of get a sense of scale and things like that,
I thought I put it in.
Let's see.
But I don't think I did. I thought I did, but I don't think I did. Here.
It's not in the Kindle version. Let me see if it's at the end. Though.
And I should apologize to all my dear readers. Apologies. We're going to get that fixed. Now let me see. Where are my maps? Yep, my fault. Let's see.
I just think it's awesome. I love in the fantasy books when there's a map in the beginning, because it kind of gives me just a sense. Yeah, it gives an idea like where we are, what place we are at, what's where. It just helps a bit to get the first touch.
I'm looking for my
your
map.
bearings, basically.
All right, I've got it in my files. I've got a file on every nation almost in my world, or most of them so far. Let me see. Map of Caledonia. Which do you want to see, Caledonia or these isles?
I was thinking more like an overview of everything.
All right.
Like the Hyborian Age map, But if you don't have...
I only have the map. I'm still constructing the map of Gallia and the rest of Pangaea. Pangaea is the world, but it's... Okay, let me see. Map of the Isles. All right, let me see. I'm going to go with... let's see if I can... Oh. Okay.
It's not a must if you can't find it right now.
It is a must because,
okay,
people deserve to see it. Let me see this. I seem to. All right, come on, Gimp. For some reason, it was there before. Here, I'll just close this and. Okay, the file is really big, so it's taking a minute to open.
Right. Yeah. No worries. Well,
that's why.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book. So, are you gonna guys do like another anthology, or are you gonna go straight into?
Yep. Well, this is the thing. Is the actual Lord of the Rings book. Kind of book, I should say, the Brotherhood of the Gemstone, the Scottish literature book I've written. It's going to be divided into 3 parts because it's almost the first book is about so far 1,061 pages long. So that's going to be book 1. Book 2 is stretching out to be about half that length, and then book 3 is probably going to be a little more longer than book 2. So it's going to be about 2,000 pages long. It was not my intent when I wrote the book for it to be that long, but there is going to be an anthology book 2 to this, because this is part 1, and we had to divide it up because, well, this book was starting to stretch, and we wanted it fairly self-contained.
So it's going to come before the magnum opus, so to speak, the second anthology.
Yeah, both anthologies are prequels,
right?
And both show the rise and fall of the kingdom to some extent. It's a bloody civil war that lasts for about 100 years, but it also serves as the backstory for the character who's the king at the time of the magnum opus. So it's kind of important to his story. All right, I'm exporting.
Right, the context.
And yeah, because he's one of several characters, I guess you could say, assumes a bit of a similar role to Theoden. Same with his wife, and sort of. They're both kind of mentors, but kind of integral party characters. And between them and the actual character who serves as a kingly mentor, Clavis, there's kind of a bit of context needed. But I also wrote a bunch of French fantasy novels a while back, and those are still only part of the way finished. I'm trying to export.
I think doing actually an anthology, that's a good idea actually to start with, to like dip into the world before you like completely throw someone into the bigger story, so to speak. So you can get a little feel for it, feel for the what has happened.
That was precise. That was precisely it. Here, I think I've finally got it in JPEG form. Oh,
yeah, we'll see if it works.
Okay, I'm having
no
problems.
Worries. No worries.
I don't know why I'm having so many difficulties with this. Okay, I'm going to first share Caledonia. It looks smoother. I had a good map. Let's see. Here she is. Caledonia, I believe. Because I originally did this for another novel, which was more a comedy spoof novel, kind of like The Hobbit. So you can see a bit of the road.
Right.
But this is the overall idea of the kingdom. I later ended up adding more islands here. So there's not many right now. But
it's good.
So. I'd like to revamp it. And
so where does the first story?
The first story would take place around here, near the Wend.
Oh right, the Wend River,
yeah. And the Firth of the Wend is where the Vikings come along.
Right.
Because there are Vikings, there has to be, and they basically sail up the river. And the thing is, Vikings were prone to doing that historically. Now, a lot of the story also takes place like down in the south, because you've got, for example, in the Black Mormare story, one of the Marcher Lords, I think around here, gets thoroughly ticked off with one of the kings and his staff. You've got the Black Row Fields, which I think takes place. Oh, right. Black Row would probably be more around here, this area. And you've got, of course, the second story, which takes place closer to this area. And I was supposed to also add later another island, because in the narrative, another island ended up being placed here. That's just how the narrative played out. So this map was made years ago.
Well, we got someone who loves it. Tom Highland, Iron Age author of Highlandian. It says, love the map. Now I know who to turn to for map design. Yes, spam Joe's email with map design requests.
I'd be happy to. I love map making.
I mean, as I said, it looks like a good map.
Here, I've got a larger one, but it's not looking good to me. But like, hold on, I might be able to get a better quality version. Okay, my computer's causing problems when I try to open it, so I'll open the lower quality one. Either that or wait. Hold on.
I can.
Nope. I got it open perfectly. We're going to the full islands. We're going to all the islands. I'm very excited. Sorry, I love this map. But my French map is looking better at one point, but then the program I used crashed, and I couldn't renew my license for a while.
Oh, nice.
On it. So, or my subscription, I mean. So here it is. You have the glacial sea to the north, and in the south you have the Kingdom of Britia, which I love this kingdom because it's England. And you have the Britian Channel, but the Gallians call it the Gallian Channel because it's theirs. La Manche Gallien, because everything belongs to France. The Land of Eriu, where I have another novel that's going to be I'm republishing after editing. I'm hoping to get it edited in June and get it republished with a new cover design. Amadan is over to the north, and Amadan is at war with the rest of the Land of Eriu, where I have a story that's going to be borrowing more from King Arthur. So think Irish King Arthur.
It looks great. The map really looks great.
Thanks. Erging here because I wanted 2 whales. Because I know there's 1 whales, but I want to add an extra one so I have more to play with.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm just joking. Anyone from Wales.
And there's Voluntia, which is the idea is this is where some of the remnant people of Rome or Roma fled to.
Oh. So you would say this is quite a historical fantasy inspired?
Yes. Very much so.
Very much so, yeah. Because that was going to be one of my questions was why did you want to do fantasy let's say instead of like a completely historical novel, let's say? Well,
in a historical novel, I find you need to make sure you get every detail right.
Yeah.
You need to, well, it's the truth.
It is.
Irregularity or inaccurate thing will set me off as a reader, and I can't read anymore. But on the other hand, there's no room for what if, and most alternate history novels are not really my cup of tea. So, my desire was to write also alternatively, like what if this happened in history? Because when I read history, I often think about what if this historic figure made this decision or that, or this volcano erupted at this time and that affected the landscape and
that's going to be interesting. The alternate history.
Fantasy allowed me to take control of that. And then the trouble is I started writing elf poems, and I started writing epic poems and epic elf poems. And they started off, the first one started off as a bit of an epic poem dedicated to my dog. I know that sounds weird. And it's an elf poem about a celestial dog or a celestial wolf, take your pick, and an elf prince having to go on a quest into Niflheim to retrieve a lost soul. And the thing is, the elf prince also has to rediscover his core values because he's kind of lost his way a little after his wife died. And so he only realizes how much he loves his father when, in the last book, when he's realizing, when he is going to die. So the thing is, I was starting to write elf poems and that kind of, and I wanted to put a story for that, and that's in the ancient history. And I also love mythology, so I wanted to write, what if the gods were real? The gods of mythology were real. And, that spiraled down a whole rabbit hole. Well, what happens when, if some mythologies are real, or semi-real, how does that affect history? And then from there, it evolved into the idea of instead of it being an alternate history or something, there are alternate history stuff, but it's set in a pre-Ice Age world, such as in a pre-cataclysmic world. But it's also the idea of the world history does repeat to a limited extent. So there's a lot of different inspiration that was drawn in terms of mythology, history, anthropology, and whatnot. Because I have a friend who's a big fan of anthropology, and he always likes to talk about that. So
I was just going to ask you. So would you classify it as like you said, dark fantasy? I noticed in your own description.
This is dark fantasy. And the other thing with this is my Scottish magnum opus and my long French novel series, where the first book, which is one of the shortest, is at 1,547 pages long. Second book is, I think, only 1,200. Then the next one's like 2,100 pages long. The idea was to create a full-length mythology for Scotland and France, more in the mold of Tolkien and Howard's myths and legends and fairy stories and all of that, their expanded universe. But the trouble is, the French novel series is stretched on too long. I actually have to run the first book through a bunch of edits. And for my Scottish projects, the idea is that I'll be able to, with Dan's help, write these stories and basically publish them as I finish them. And the idea is just that I'm Celtic. I'm of Scoto-Irish-French descent. So I feel a lot of kinship with the Celtic world and my fellow Celts. So, and I do consider France very much a Celtic country. And so this is my love letter to those countries. But I'm also currently writing some Japanese stories. So I'm also writing a bit of a love letter to Shintoism and Japanese culture, and because they don't have any real samurai fantasy fiction over there. So I want to write that stuff. But that's going to come down the road. But for now, I'm focusing on Scotland and
Scotland.
Where everyone rolls their R's too much, like we French do. But the thing is,
how many wars were fought because you didn't understand the other person?
Yeah. But the thing with the English portion, though, is I've got one epic poem already finished for the Kingdom of Britia, for a major battle, and it's inspired by the Battle of 937, and I considered actually putting that poem into the beginning of this book, but then I decided against it because I wasn't sure if people would want that and how good the poem is. I do have one novel mostly finished. It's a kid's novel, but it's written much more lyrically, which takes place in this area, in Estria, beyond the Weald or river. And it's pretty much taking place over here, and it's a dragon slaying story with a knight. Well, not really a knight, but a warrior who goes on a kind of knightly quest with his hunting dog to slay a dragon. And
that was actually a question I was going to ask about this anthology and the upcoming series, because it's in the same world, right? So
yeah.
So is it as it's dark fantasy? Is there a lot of like mythological beings, beasts, wizards, magic, stuff like that? What's your take, or is it more like like historical fantasy in the sense that there isn't really
Oh,
any,
yes,
any magical stuff.
there's a lot of magical stuff.
Right.
I love that stuff. I'm addicted to fantasy. World of Conan. Earlier this past week, before real life hit me with some stuff, I wrote an essay over on Substack about Zelda. And it was as I was writing that in a Why I Love Fantasy essay that I remembered being 2 years old and sitting next to my eldest brother as he played A Link to the Past. And I remember how that was the first kindling to my love for fantasy. And there's a lot of magic in that and in Suikoden, which I saw at about 5 years old. So there's going to be a lot of magic and love and passion, but also gods and demons and elves and fantasy races.
So in these stories, in this world.
Yeah. This world has all of that. And
okay.
What I know some may not like fantasy races, but I love to have them because I like how different the world seems at that when there's all those races, as it helps with the escapism. Conan
elves,
doesn't.
You mean like elves, dwarves, orcs?
Yeah,
the classics.
Yeah, and Conan doesn't need that stuff because he's escapism enough. But the thing is, since I'm drawing some inspiration from Tolkien, I figured I felt I needed it. But at the same time, I'm not exactly going to go with the Tolkienian orcs. I've already written a bit of a history. I've written a few poems, and I've almost finished one French short story for a kind of, a character inspired by Doomhammer from Warcraft. And the idea is to get into the orcs. But the thing is, the orcs are facing a kind of conflict because they're across the sea from Gallia, and Gallia, the French kingdom, is wanting to Francicize them. They're trying to export their culture and their language into the orcs' lands. And the orcs have a united kingdom, and the orcs do not want that. But in turn, you have some of the orcs who are trying to colonize Gallia. But the orcs who are colonizing are becoming ever more French. So you have this culture war between them as well.
Right.
So the orcs.
Interesting.
The orcs, I'm wanting not to go with, because much as I love Tolkien and Howard, there's a lot of history to fantasy as a genre.
Yeah.
Warcraft completely changed how we look at orcs in fantasy fiction. And I would argue Warcraft, I know there was other fantasy stories starting to flirt with non-evil orcs, but I really feel Warcraft was the one that really changed the way we look at things. And they were the most popular. So I'm not drawing from their orcs exactly, but I do kind of regard it as, you can't deny the influence.
Your orcs are going to be blue, not green.
No, they're going to be green. And red, and a few other colors. But the thing is, I'm going more with a
blue with blue hair.
Sure.
I insist.
But these orcs are a very Gallic, or I should say Celtic people in a way, as they have a lot of music and song, and but they are I don't think the woke would like them they're very bigoted. They think most humans are filthy animals or just annoying, but they like to convert and assimilate humans to their own culture. But I don't go with orcs and humans being able to mate. They can't. They have different biological ancestors, so they can't mate. I also have beast folk, which is to say minotaurs, wolfmen, cat folk, rat folk, and even kind of gargoyles. But I basically have if the race has any kind of animal trait, I'm basically just grouping them under beast folk, which is a large umbrella. So I've got a bunch of other animal-like races. My favorites are the wolfmen and the gargoyles.
And they're all like sentient? races in the sense that they have their kind of tribes or tribes or kingdoms or so forth.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thanks. Now, the continent that these islands are off the coast of is North Agenor. There's North and South Agenor, so there's two kind of Mediterraneans. And the two Agenors are often in conflict. The northern one is dominated by the Holy Empire of Valahalla, which is basically the Holy Roman Empire, and the Kingdom of Gallia, or the 12 Kingdoms before it was unified. Gallia is what happens after the 12 Kingdoms eventually come together as one larger kingdom. To the south, in South Agenor, you have the Empire of Theodosianople, and you have Corax, the Kingdom of the Orcs, both of which are dominant forces in that continent, which is pretty vast and whatnot. Only reason those two countries don't war is because they're on opposite ends of the continent. But they are starting to have problems with Valahalla and Gallia. But by the time of this anthology, it's more Valahalla, which is a bit of a problem, because Gallia has yet to fully come into its own. It's still pretty much 12 kingdoms, which are in the midst of fusing together, or being conquered, I should say, over the course of time. Yeah, I'm writing several fantasy stories.
Yes, he's writing the whole new era of fantasy stories. Joe has a lot of fingers in many pies, making a lot of good stuff, and that's great. That's awesome. Just flowing with the creativity. I love it. I think it's
a lot of these countries and stories I was working on years ago, but a lot of them got shelved for YouTube. But since I've gone over to Substack, I'm still wanting to spend time on YouTube. I really love chatting about on all the fantasy channels. But the thing is, a lot more of my time when I'm not at work is being sunk into my novels now, because I'm over on Substack, as I said, where I'm writing a bunch of serial novels. The most prominent one is Darkspire Conspiracy, which is a Scandinavian, which is to say Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland focused fantasy novel, which is a sequel to the Volsung saga. It's about 2,000 years after the Volsungs, and the idea is that just as this is happening in the land of Caledonia, meanwhile, actually about 100 years to 150 years after this book, you have the Darkspire Conspiracy, which is conspiring to revive a wicked witch. And you have a group of people who are brought together by the king Dagfinner, a dwarven king, and he's basically wanting them to go and stop the conspiracy. And this fellowship of sorts is going to be led by Volmung, heir to the house of Volsung. And the idea is that takes place in Norvik, which is basically Norway. And
right.
They have to travel all the way over to the east. And then some of the characters will end up journeying even further east into what one might call Finland, and others will have to backtrack, and they have to basically try to get all the kingdoms to work together to stop the Serpent Men and this Darkspire Conspiracy and this wicked witch from, ushering in basically just destroying everything. So this book is very much a prequel to a lot of different stories. But the Crown of Blood, though, is how...
Which we have up here on screen. You can purchase it at Amazon, Kindle, and then there's the paperback you can get as well. Yeah.
And
go buy it, support it.
And I'm going to have to add the map in there if people like it.
Definitely add the map, bro. Definitely add it.
Okay.
If you can.
Yeah, I will. It's a big file, though. So, the map would be about 70% of the file. And
maybe you can compress it somehow. I don't know.
I've tried, and it's just like, well, let me see. Actually, it might be possible. Let me see. Okay, so sometimes it comes up to like the uncompressed.
Afterwards. Yeah, do it then.
Well, no, it's already been compressed. Apparently, I accidentally did that. So
okay.
The original file was 300. Well, I think like around 300 megabytes or something. But because I've got that's basically the Photoshop file, and then you have the actual map, which I just showed on screen, comes up to 9,000 kilobytes. So I should be able to add it. It's just the actual image is large, so I have to try to press it into the Word file, and that always takes a few hours. And I'll probably do that on my next day of work, so that way I can, when I'm tired from work, I could just come home and I could just do that instead of anything else. The Crown of Blood, though, overall, when it came time to writing this, though, I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect to actually enjoy writing it. I just wrote it more like as a perfunctory thing. I had to write it. And then when I got around to writing it, I actually grew to like some of the characters. And I think my favorite story is either Amleb, the Fat King's story, or
you should read a bit of your favorite passage from this book.
Okay, let me find it. Let me see. It might be tricky. All right, let me see. I've got Kettle right here. Wait, if I have Kettle, that means I can find.
I can show it on screen as well.
All right, let me see. The Black Crow Fields. That would be around, I don't know what page on the Kindle edition. Page 211 in the paperback edition. That's when the chapter starts.
Okay, I'm there.
Let's see. It's near the end of the story that I believe the passage takes place. You have one of the more villainous characters who has a moment of realization, because he's basically just sacrificed his son to possibly achieve victory. And you have hearing of this black treachery and seeing the sudden attack by his most trusted ally, Padraig Mac Ringen, father of Ringen, was to freeze where he stood when the news was brought to him. Never since the time of the death of his wife had he felt so stricken or numb to the world around him. At that time, though, an enemy, Ahothan of Strathclard, had expressed his sincere condolences to him, an act that had disgusted him. Yet now there was none to turn to, none to rail against, and none to speak to. Never in all his years had he felt this. At that moment, there was a hole that was torn open in his heart, one that threatened to swallow him whole. How could this be? He cannot have fallen, Padraig stuttered for the first time in his life, consumed by a black grief he had never felt before. And later he's asked, where do we charge? Let us charge forward. And he says, but Padraig could not hear him. All he could hear was the cackling of 3 crones he had never heard before, the squawking of crows, and the screams of his son. Charge! To Ringen! He shrieked, turning his horse to begin the charge. What? But sire, to Ringen! He repeated, swinging his men westward so that in that hour he chose defeat over victory. And screaming as he did so, tears in his eyes as his heart lay broken somewhere in that field. Ringen! Ringen! Answer me! Answer me! It is your father! Please, I did not mean it! Please, you could never fail me! Come to me, my son! Ringen, oh Ringen! Where art thou? And it is said that when at last he did find his son, he threw himself onto his corpse, weeping and begging for his forgiveness. All that is known is that Adeath's blade found him also, and that when Simon and Louis found the corpse, they found him with his beloved son held tightly in his arms.
Right. Yeah, I found it here in the Kindle edition as well. That's tragic.
Yep. Now, this was one of the villains, and he kind of, in his last moments, has a moment of realization. Because throughout that story, he's abusing his son Ringen, only to later realize that's his son. That's his flesh and blood. And so he charges, as I worded it there, he chose he basically sees his defeat from the jaws of victory. And the thing is, Padrig was a very strong-natured character throughout the book. He appears in several short stories, and he's a brilliant general. But the thing is, before he, at the beginning of the story, he's never really led an army. Then when he first does it, he basically cracks some feats which no one else could. But the trouble is that he became arrogant and believed that, well, if I could do it, my son should be able to do it at 15. But that's not exactly realistic. And his son is a much shyer, quieter individual, so he kind of holds that against his son and rails against him. But Padrig, on the other hand, is a man who has lost the woman he loved. He has lost everything. And he's a man who kept focusing on blaming his enemies. But then in that moment, he has only himself to blame. And so he charges from defeat to victory. And part of the challenge with him was figuring out, how do I write such a awesome winner, a guy who can win almost any fight, and who does? How do I get him to lose? How do I get him to completely crack? Because what drives him? And the idea with each of these stories is, when these kings are faced with their demise, I want to see what motivates them, what is in their heads, but I don't want to have thought bubbles. And that's where Padrig was one of the most interesting, because he's so stoic and sneering to everyone. But then in his last moments, he completely cracks. And that was the editor's favorite scene and Dan's favorite scene, I think, or at least one of them. Dan's got two favorite scenes. I've got two of them. My other favorite scene, well, actually, I've got three of them. One of them is pretty wholesome. But the other favorite scene I have is one dying king who he has a necklace which was given to him, and basically he's trying to reach for it. And
in which story?
That would be in the one of Amleb the Fat. So let me look for that. I had problems getting a table of contents up, so I do hope people will forgive me for that. Let me see. I believe... No.
Is it the man who thought himself king? No.
Let me see. I'm just going to see. It would be A Dagger in the Night.
Oh, right.
A Dagger in the Night is right down here, I believe. Right. And Amlev is one of the funniest guys, because he's a fat blowhard who, how do I put it? He makes fun of others. He can dish it out, but then he doesn't always dish it in really well. And everybody's like, this guy cannot, because he gets it in his head, he's going to marry a female troubadour. He's going to marry a female bard. And and everybody's like, you can't do this. You are not permitted to do this. So he goes and does it. But then they're like, okay, well, you can't become king then. And he becomes king. And it's just, everything kind of falls into his lap, then falls out of his lap. And he's a man who actually could be a very good king. But the thing is, life is so cruel to him, he eventually just gives up. But then, at the end, well, he's trying, there's a knife in the dark, and he's basically stabbed, and he's trying to reach for the necklace of his wife. And it's all he really wants in that moment. And, I have to stretch that out, which was hard. And it is a pretty fun story. And well, the funny thing is, though, I did put in a joke in the next story about Anlib because he became so fat. Homer of Kull jokes about how they should have used an ox cart to bring the corpse to the royal necropolis, but everybody voted him down and said, no, we're just going to cremate him here. We're not bothering with an ox cart. Then when they arrive, they're told, you disrespected the corpse. You should have used the ox cart. And for a chunk of that story, you just have Homer saying, I told you so, to everyone who will listen. I just thought that would be the most Howardian joke imaginable, but that no one would listen to the guy from Kull. But yeah, but that's not my favorite part. But I really like getting into Amlib's head. Amlib was fun. But it
looks like a fun story.
But that story was also hard because it had the most poetry and songs, and I had to basically write, like, I think I wrote a bunch of them.
Oh yeah, I can see.
And I had to translate them from French to English, and I had to keep the rhyme structure and the meaning in both.
Here they are in French.
Yep. And
is it also in English? Because it's only in French here.
Oh, I had put it in English. Yep.
Wait, let's see. Yeah. Oh, I think it changes afterwards.
Yeah, because the translation, because there's that description, and there's most of the poems are translated, and most of them feature this young bardess of sorts singing, because she's French and she's singing to these Scottish kings and lairds and whatnot. And the thing is, I thought she was a fun character. She's not terribly feisty. But she gets a few feisty moments. The main thing is she's trying to prove herself in a bit of a song battle at the beginning, because her dad was the best singer in the world. And she's trying to prove she is her father's daughter. And she then sings, and Amlib falls in love because she sings better than anyone he's ever heard. And she sings in both languages fluently, to the amazement of him. Now, the idea is, though it's written in English, they're speaking in Gaelic, and I can't write Gaelic, so I had to write in English. So she's speaking two very different languages. Gaelic in the Middle Ages, like today, would be regarded as on the edge of the world. This is a language that has no practical purpose. So for her to know it impresses these lairds, who then go on to basically say, wow, okay, guess we got to hire her. But there's a bunch of little characters like that who...
this is great. A lot of characters. You got a lot of characters, a lot of stories. It's really nice way to dip into this world.
Thanks. The thing is, though, currently Dan wants to expand on the Padrid character from the passage I read before, because he really liked that character. He actually created that. Well, okay, I had the name in a genealogy. Dan created the personality from that.
Yeah.
And then I wrote that one scene. I wrote that story, sent it to Dan. Dan made some changes and basically acted like the film director for that story. So in some of these stories, when you see my name ahead of Dan's, that's because I wrote it. Or if it's only my name, I was alone in writing it. But if you see Dan's name alone, then he wrote it. But if you see Dan's name, then mine, then it means, I think that's how we did it with a few stories. Yeah. For example, in The Shadow of the Longwoods, my name's ahead of Dan's because I did most of the work. But then in one of the later stories, I think it was the final one, the Mid-Autumn Hunt, actually. No, not the last one, I think. This is the last one, I think. You have, it's Dan's name ahead of mine because he did most of the legwork on that one. And I basically acted like the film director, like saying, no, we got to take it in this direction, go in that direction. And so he would. And, like I'd send him he'd send me for Mid-Autumn Hunt. He'd send me the story. I'd make some changes and write some passages and rewrite some, send it back to him. He'd rewrite and reorient. Then it'd be sent back to me. I'd edit it. Then send it back to him. He'd edit it. And then he'd send it back to me. I'd edit it again. And then I send it back to him. And then we send it to the editor. He edits it. He sends it back. We edit it again on his orders. And it was a long, complicated process. I know it doesn't sound very practical, but most of these short stories were written, I think, in about per short story, it was written each about 1 a week, sometimes 2 a week. And some took longer. This one with Amleb, the Dagger in the Night, took about a month because of all those damn songs.
Yeah.
But the Black Crow Field took about 3 days. That one passage, though, Dan was kind of... Actually, let me look. Dan played a large role. He was basically the film director for that one. I say film director, but it's like he basically directed the action, was like, I want this to happen. I want this guy. I want that. I want this. And what he ended up doing was... Let me see. Where did I put it? Right. The Black Crow Fields. Yeah, I did the he wanted to write it, but then I did the draft, and then he ended up kind of directing it, writing several of the scenes. But Dan was kind of shaky on some things, and then came that one scene which I read, and Dan really loved it. That's when he was all gung-ho for the story and almost took it from me so that he could redo it all for himself because he loved it for that one scene. But we didn't do that. Dan ended up going, okay. And he really loved that scene. That was his, I think, favorite scene in this book, along with Final Supper. If you want, I could read a scene he wrote, and he put a lot of love into it. And I would have probably wanted him to read it.
Yeah, do it.
Let me find. Well, okay. First off,
is it from the Black Crow Fields?
This would be from the Final Supper.
The Final Supper, all right.
Now, real quick, Dan did put in one quick joke I will reference. Isla, referring to her sister-in-law, Isla is one of the princesses, says about her sister-in-law, she ought to be sent to a brothel because a convent's too good for her. But I'm not going to... It's not that scene that I'm actually looking at here. Let's see. It would be... I'm trying to find the speech that Domhnall gives. Now, you have King Domhnall. Silence! King Domhnall screamed, red-faced and enraged, now shaking with fury. This was supposed to be a meal of peace for the family. I wish for one final meal and no more arguments. And what happens? You all shout about Bardrock's sister or Dweeb's lands or illegal marriages. All I asked for was just one meal. You have him. The room was silent now. Everyone was in disbelief that the meek king who would obey Ringen, his younger brother, like a little lamb, was now howling at them in the manner of a mad wolf. Neither his sons nor his nephews had ever seen him in such a mood. They even doubted Ringen had even seen him behave so. Sorry, I misread that. For the love of the sick and tired old man, can we not have one dinner in peace? One where we are a family. Nicol, Padraig, you both once played together and were as inseparable as brothers. Do you not remember? David, Malios, and Domhnall, you all raced and swam together. Now look at you. Dweeb, who was it who taught you to use a sword? Was it not my Rybert? Why is it you now brave for blood? Above all else, we are family. Is that too much to ask for? He tore then the crown off his head with such force that all stared at him as he waving it around. This is what everything is about. This is all about this hollow crown. Do all of you truly want it? Very well, take it. And yeah, he ends up tossing it onto the table. And from there, the drama heats back up not long after. But Domhnall clearly no longer wants the crown. And Dan shows a man who initially, while he is starting to lose interest in it, he claimed it when he didn't have the right. But now he's completely become sickened towards it and is basically telling his family, this thing is destroying us. Like, you are destroying, you're going to murder each other, your cousins and brothers and whatnot. And you would murder each other for what? What's more important, a crown or family? Now, his family ends up saying the crown. But there's a young child, Simon, who picks up the crown and says, maybe everyone should just go pray and just go to church together. And maybe that'll solve our problems, because I'm always told to go to church when I do something bad. And this kind of breaks the ice for a minute. But Simon is a child. He doesn't fully, he does understand, but he also doesn't understand all the nuances of what's going on. But ultimately, these MacDonalds and Macringans break into fighting. And this was a passage Dan wrote and poured all his heart and soul into. And I believe he was his thinking was, to an extent, if Macbeth was not haunted by visions, did usurp the crown, and had a lot of kids and had time to regret this decision, something to that effect. So you have or even Henry IV, when he's lecturing Prince I think it is, or Prince Harry, who would become Henry V. So Dan, that was one of his passages that I really liked. I think there's a lot of pathos there.
Yeah.
And I really like Simon.
Yeah. It's really, I really like the dialogue and the writing. Like I said, I've only read the first chapter of the first story. Sorry, I didn't get around to
No, it's okay.
to read it all, but I really liked it. I thought we can actually go back to the first one, because that's the first one that draws people in. So it's best to it's in the sample as well. So it's always good to start with the first story. So in the Valley of the Dark River, like we talked about in the beginning of this interview, it's about let's say the chieftains about to embark on a battle.
Yep.
Talking about it basically at the fires before being highly confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was like, when I started to read this, because it just it immediately grabbed me. So that's first in my opinion, a really good sign when someone's written something. When something like immediately, you have to take a hold of the imagination. You have to speak with the words, and I really like you've invested in the words and invested in the world and invested in painting the world, like Howard did, and many other such authors. They I don't know, it sometimes feels like the newer fantasy guys. I'm not speaking about the indie people. I'm speaking about like the mainstream fantasy who have big books and stuff like that. Sometimes it feels kind of like we kind of skip the world building. We skip the descriptions. I mean, the descriptions. Like we usually, like, a lot of people want to just get right into the nitty gritty. Like we're
descriptions
like
are the best part.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it sometimes it feels like I know you hate Game of Thrones and stuff his stuff, but and I like it, but but not that much anymore. Like I have no desire anymore to read it.
The world building Martin did, like if you look at the baronial history of his world, it's freaking beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
I love the history of the Tully family and the Riverlands, and also the North. I think that's the strongest world building Martin's ever done, and I think it's beautiful. Yeah. I love those regions, and honestly, like I think Martin's funny as well. Sometimes, like sometimes I don't like the Game of Thrones books, but like I honestly think like for his Fire and Blood book, like putting in the name of the Muppets was hilarious. I thought that was just so funny. But as to what you said about the language and it grabbing you, honestly, you're gonna make me cry because I'm always very shy with my writing, and I'm trying not to be in this interview. It's they're all
good question by Gola. Just download to my Kindle are they all different short stories in one book. So it's short stories. It's an anthology. It's one book. It's describing events in this world about kings and other chieftains, royals, whatever.
Yeah,
different people, bards, and stuff like that happening. Different stories in this world before Joe and Dan are about to venture into the. Would you say the main story or the main?
Yeah, that's actually.
You call it the Lord of the Rings, your Lord of the Rings.
Well, my Scottish Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, your Scottish Lord of the Rings. So this is a good way to like we said earlier to dip into the world of was it Pangaea?
West Pangaea. That's actually
West Pangaea.
Yep. This is to the west of North Agonor, which is a continent or in Pangaea. And the thing is, this is basically the appendixes or the first part of the appendixes that Dan and I rewrote. Yeah. Also, because Dan suggested rewriting it into short stories because I was starting on a bit of the process, but Dan actually said expand it. Then another friend, Richard from Iron Age Media, he and I have been in contact for about 2 years almost. And he suggested writing stories on Substack and writing short stories. So I delved into this and I started turning my appendixes into short stories. But really it follows a direct narrative across the reigns of several kings. And I also tried to slip in, now that I think about it, some Shakespeare, such as the Three Crones. You have Shakespearean kind of imagery I try to use, and some Tolkienian and Howardian stuff because they're the best. And basically try to create a bit of a Scottish mythology, but this is really a dark tale as it's the death of kings. But the magnum opus is a children's novel. I know that sounds silly that these dark stories are going to lead into a children's novel, but the children's novel is about a hero called Cormac, who he has to go on a quest, and he's really having to stop a satanic figure from getting his necklace back. But the thing is, Cormac is accompanied by friends and whatnot. But the difference between him and, say, Frodo is that Cormac is not liked by his mother, and his father disappeared at sea more than a decade ago. So he's longing for his father. So this is also a journey about father and son. And there's also his lost grandfather who disappeared decades ago. So the fathers and it's an intergenerational thing where Cormac sets out with no hope of really meeting his grandfather, but in time the two will come together, grandfather and grandson. And the father is kind of in there as well, but in a different way. And so you have 3 generations of men in this family who have been lost to each other. And then it comes together. But it's about family and loss and friendship and war and hope. But the thing is, the Scottish novel Brotherhood of the Gemstone I finished, but I've a semi-offer with a publisher, but they want to do a hybrid agreement wherein I would give them some money for the publication. They're a very good publisher, but in return, they would help with some of a lot of the marketing and a lot of other stuff. But I don't have the means right now to pay for the publication of this Brotherhood of the Gemstone. And so in the meantime, they suggested also building up a platform and a name as a writer. So I've started on that. So Crown of Blood is the first step, along with on my Substack, where I write a bunch of serial novels and serial short stories and whatnot. 2 stories a week, and typically. So
is the map in the paperback, by the way?
No, I'm going to have to put that in there.
Yeah, it's good to have. Also, I was going to ask, are the stories in chronological order? Like when we start with In the Valley of the Dark River, and then it just goes forward in chronological?
It had to be, because when we were writing it, we did not write it in chronological order, mostly because Dan's a slower writer, so I'd sometimes go on ahead. But then he'd go on ahead at one point when I had to double back. And the thing is, when we were organizing the stories, we had to kind of take the names of the kings and just put them in order. Like, okay, this leads to this, and just kind of lay them on a table. And
that's actually pretty good. I like it that it is in chronological order.
Otherwise, it would confuse me. Like, I'm not going to lie, it confused me writing it out of chronological order sometimes. So we go back and do the edits and review it and rewrite it in chronological order after we did the first few drafts, because honestly it got confusing, and we got confused as the writers. Like, how are the readers going to feel? So we were like, everything has to be in chronological order. Because
there's going to be a lot of names, a lot of places. You have to kind of take your time, get invested.
But the other thing about this world, half the fun, sorry, the dog's starting to cry. Half the fun was also exploring the geography, because honestly, like, I know some fantasy authors, like you said, just want to get into the action. I'm going to be honest, initially as a writer, years and years and years ago, I was like that. But as I've gotten older, I like writing about the mountains. I like writing about the highlands. I like writing about the landscape, the history. Like, for example, the Black Crow Fields. Well, they're not originally called the Black Crow Fields. They're the White Mane Fields. And, well, how do they get that name? Well, because of the white lilies that grow there. But the thing is, why did it eventually develop the name Black Crow? Was because of the death of, Padraig. But you see, before then, this field was noted for being the site of many battles. And you also have the final battle at the end of this book, which is the climax of it. The field there has been the site of more than a dozen battles, such as when Roma, the Grand Empire, tried to invade Caledonia and failed. And they did have a battle there, and they won, but then they couldn't carry through with that victory. And you've got, for example, when I was writing the French novels, I originally was writing it with the big climax and big, like the nitty gritty stuff in mind. But as I was writing, I actually got more lost in the economic trade, like the commerce, like of this town or that town. And I got lost in the history of each castle and each hill and each river, and like the history of the local nymph, because every river also has a nymph attached to it. And I got lost in that and in their personal histories. So the world building is the best part. And I'm going to be honest, this is going to be real. People are really going to notice this and might even complain a little, I think, when Brotherhood of the Gemstone is published. Darkspire Conspiracy, I'm hoping to have that published for July or August. I'm more than halfway done. That's my Scandinavian kind of Volsung Saga, Lord of the Rings type inspired novel. But Darkspire Conspiracy gets a little lost in some of the local landscape and mountains and snowbanks and whatnot.
Don't get too lost.
I'm sorry, I can't help it.
Don't get too lost, because this, if you get lost from the story, people are gonna like wander too far away.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's good advice. So, yeah. Okay. One sec. The dog's just fussing. Okay. What are you doing? He's wanting his teeth brushed, but he's got to wait. He's got to learn some patience. But
No,
yeah.
like I was saying, I thought the description, like I can read a bit here. It's when I first read this, the lochs tendrils snake their way through much of the heart of the lands, to the north of the highlands, wintry lands as often invaded by frost and rain as they were by barbarians of such savagery that they were beyond the ken of all men of the southlands. Painted they wore upon their persons furs as well as they might wear hauberks crafted of iron. In days of yore, they and the people of Kaled lands had been one, separated only by the river Wend. More recently, they had changed as surely as the Kaleds had. I think it's great. Like I said, some fantasy story, like short stories or stuff like that, they start immediately from the dialogue. And I mean, you can start it like that. I'm not saying you can't. You can't start it like you can if you want to. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I just, for me personally, I like when we have the descriptions and books have. They draw you into the story, into the where we are, so we get once again the bearings. That's why I like the map as well, because you get your bearings and you kind of like become grounded in this reality, in this story, in this place. So like, okay, that looks kind of like this looks kind of like that, we're here, this is where we're at, instead of just like we're doing the just the dialogue with just the action, and you're kind of like left maybe a bit confused, like what's going on, where are we, what's over here and what's over there. So that I just want to commend the descriptions you have in the stories, and I can see, like, we've gone through a few of the stories here, so I can see that many of the stories have a lot of descriptions and world building. So I really like it.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to starting a story, I find it hard as a writer. Like I said before, when I was a younger writer, sometimes I did start with the dialogue, but then as I aged, I read Lord of the Rings, Mark Twain, Howard, and I would go, well, my favorite stuff doesn't start that way. So then and then when I was writing, I'm like, do I really want to start with dialogue? I like the world more. So the world is a character. So I decided I'd start with the world's dialogue, as I put it. Yeah. And you've got, like, for Darkspire Conspiracy, what I enjoyed was, for example, there I started a little more lyrical. Like, when it was announced that Sigrun would soon return after a little more than 10 years away, there was much talk of celebrating this momentous occasion. This was especially the case amongst the older folk of the village of Haithran, who felt that the return of Gertrude's daughter was an occasion that necessitated a great deal of fanfare. Gertrude was a very well-to-do fisherwoman and had been previously considered rather unremarkable. That is, until her husband died and the Jarl Helgi suddenly arrived to take up her daughter as his foster child. And, that's introducing the situation of this family and of Gertrude, who's the main character of chapter 1. She's not the main character later, but the thing is, I don't get into the painted people and whatnot immediately, but I do get into the local culture from there. And then I get into the local area. And the thing about Gertrude is she's basically the matriarch of everyone she runs into. So she's the matriarch of this village in some ways.
But that's not this book, right?
No. That's and why Helgi suddenly showed up at her doorstep after her husband died to take her daughter in is a mystery that's answered a little later, but it's not the most important part of that first chapter. The first chapter is more like a long expected party of sorts. Is
it connected to this book? The
loosely.
One, the Dark. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Loosely. It takes place 150 years on from the events here. The events in this book take place about almost 100 years before the events of Brotherhood of the Gemstone.
And that's the Lord of the Rings type book you're going to start. Yeah, book 1. Yep.
And Cormag's story, Cormac is not a descendant of these kings. I will say that. He is not royalty. I am not going with that trope. The actual royal is already sitting on the crown, on the throne. He has the crown. But this is the backstory of how he came to have the crown. So you have his ancestors all the way up to that king, Malbethid. And the dog. Jet, come on, stop acting heartbroken. I've been spending the entire day with him, so he's not wanting to share. Oh, come on, pup. You already have the bed. And the pillow. But he basically uses my pillows as body pillows. But the thing is, that story I wrote first, then this came out. But the dialogue and some of the language used will be a little different. But there's not going to be the word damn used as often, because I got to censure myself a little, just a little, because kids. But the thing is, there is a lot of Celtic elements and Fae and whatnot to Brotherhood of the Gemstone. But in Crown of Blood, the Fae folk appear only a little. Actually, one of the characters who's one of the main, most important characters in Brotherhood of the Gemstone appears in this book. So I won't spoil. Well, she kind of appears in the background.
Right.
She plays a large role in determining at one point which king will win a conflict when one of the kings pisses her off. And she's not a warrior woman by any means. It's just, she's here and she's still alive 100 years later. And she, her loyalties are very clear. She's loyal to Kettle, son of Constantine the Great. Now, some of the idea here is that this civil war is also happening not just because of the power vacuum of Melmartin's death, but also Constantine II, Constantine the Great, because he was a ruler who ruled for about 40 years. So this is 40 years on from when he first took the crown, and he was a great king for 40 years, and his sons died, and so his cousin, once removed, inherited the throne, and then that guy died. So you have right there a power vacuum that tears the kingdom open and apart. Technically, Kettle, son of Constantine, was supposed to inherit. He was next in line. He was recognized as Tanis, that is to say, crown prince. But he's usurped. And that means that anyone with a drop of royal blood in an army and maybe some baronial support can take the crown, could throw down the king and replace him. And this is going to tear the kingdom apart for 100 years.
Right. So, how fast did you guys put this together, this first book? Did you... how long did it take to write?
Per story, because I didn't really keep track of, I think, the whole process. Actually, could you bring up that table of contents for me? I'll need to... and I'll do the math right now. Let's see. In the Valley of the Dark River took me about a week. I semi-wrote it as a one-off. Let me see. Final Supper took Dan about 3.5 weeks. The Man Who Thought Himself King took me a week and a half. So that's, let's see, that's about a month and 1 week and a half. Brother Against Brother, that took Dan about a week, no, 2 weeks. While he was doing that, In the Shadow of the Long Woods, I wrote in about 4 days. Death in Hallowed Halls, we wrote, I think, in under like 2-3 days. The Fall of the Two Kings and the Black Row Fields was in 1 week. Well, actually 6 days was how long it took us to write those two. To Defy a King and the Black Moormare took about 3 days between themselves. They're very short. A Dagger in the Night took about 2-3 weeks. The Mid-Autumn Hunt, I think that was like a week at most, maybe just 5 days, I think. And the Triumph of the Thistle was about half a week, probably around 2-3 days. So about 3 days. It was about 2.5 months, I think, to 3 months to write this. And
hey, listen, good evening.
John Douglas, always ever the most charming human being on the planet. He's such a champ. I really like his channel. But yeah, this took about 2 to 3 months.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
A lot shorter than other books. Brotherhood of the Gemstone, I was writing when I was able to write 10 pages to 15 pages a day. I can't keep up that pace anymore. So that took me about 3 months as well. And Darkspire I've been writing for about 4 months, I think. And I'm just nearing the end. Well, a little past the halfway point, actually. It's getting to be that it takes me longer to finish a book because I write slower these days. And that has to do with real life stuff. But
would you say it's a good place to start with a short story instead of just like, jumping right into a full fantasy novel? Instead, just, start with the short stories, get a hang of it, get the feel for it, try again, because it can be a bit daunting to map out a
whole novel.
Yeah, whole novel. Yeah. At least I've tried a bit, and it's like, oh no.
Well, it depends on the novel. Like, weirdly, I find sometimes Darkspire Conspiracy is like trying to pull teeth from a polar bear when it's in a foul mood after you've pricked its rear with a I don't know, a steak knife or something. Whereas
just another Tuesday. Yeah.
Brotherhood of the Gemstone was like basically, I don't know, buttering up a slice of bread with too much butter. It was just too easy, but not too easy, but too quick. Like it went by in a flash, and I knew where I was going. But when it came to this book, sometimes we knew where we were going, sometimes we didn't. And it was like we were on a long ship. But by the time we were at Black Crow Fields, which was one of the halfway stories, like we reached that point, and like sometimes we'd skip ahead and double back. We didn't write in chronological order. Black Crow Fields was the halfway point. That's when we knew our way. Like it was like the storm had cleared, and we were on the ship, and we knew where we were going. But in terms of the writing, comparing this to Calad Bolg, my Irish Arthurian fantasy novel, which I'm reworking, I think this is a much better book. And I think while I do have some fondness for Calad Bolg, I find Calad Bolg is a bit of an entry novel, but on the other hand, I find this is better written. This is a better intro to this world. Calad Bolg works, but it's not my favorite work I've done. Whereas this, some of the stories I'm not fond of. Others, I am fond of. Angola, I start with ideas. They eventually morph into short stories. That is how it goes oftentimes. Sometimes when it comes to writing a full novel, like I'll start, like I'm like, oh, I know where I'm going. But then by chapter 4 or 5, I go, I'm lost. And then I just go, where the hell am I going? And then I go, ooh, look, a mountain. And I go get lost in the mountain or into a bog. And I go, well, the history of this bog or this mountain is this. It stretches back 12,000 years. And these are the events that have rocked it. And I get into the history, and then I go, oh, my characters have already made it across that mountain. Damn it. I want to go back to the mountain and tell more about the mountain, but I can't. I have to keep going. And so then I'll put in, like, in 6 chapters later, a reference to that mountain and a bit more of the history, just so that I get to revisit. But I often get lost in novels, and in short stories you can't do that. You can't do that. Here we occasionally tried to just, like, if I had to describe it, it's like we had measuring, like in the Middle Ages, you would measure distance and 2 guys would go to opposite sides of the field after just making sure to measure it properly. We're basically at opposite sides of the field and going, all right, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Here's the measuring. Like, we're going to plant the staff here, you plant it over there, and we're going to try to measure the appropriate distance for a cathedral for us to build. And that's what we were doing with Crown of Blood. But with Brother of the Gemstone, it was basically, I'm basically throwing my backpack over my shoulder and going around with Cormac and his friends and trying to basically tell them the history, when half the time they're saying, I don't care. And I'm basically getting lost. Then I am lost at sea because they have to take to the sea. They have to take to the waves. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it works. In my French novels, I get even more lost.
Howard also had a character called Cormac?
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had.
I love that name. It was either
because there's the mythological Cormac, right? From is it Irish mythology? I think
so. Yeah, Cormac.
Yeah. So that's I think it's quite a used name in that sense in the Celtic.
Yep, it is. The Celts often reuse it. Cormac mac Airt, or Cormac Quinn, or Cormac O'Fada, Longbeard, and he's supposed to be a High King of Ireland. And there's some great stories about him. He was absolutely the best king, as it's quoted, that ever reigned in Ireland before himself. Wise, learned, valiant, and mild, not given causelessly to be bloody as many of his ancestors were. He reigned majestically and magnificently. That's in one of the annals from 1627. And I absolutely love the name Cormac. But yeah.
Howard had a character called Cormac Fitzgeoffrey.
Ooh.
Cormac Fitzgeoffrey is a fictional character by Robert E. Howard. He's half Norman, half Gael knight who is taking part in the Third Crusade. Howard wrote 2 short stories featuring the character and a synopsis that was later completed by another author. Although Howard was most famous for his fantasy fiction, especially Conan, the Cormac stories have, for the majority, a purely historical setting, albeit the second one involves Lovecraftian elements.
Yeah, I didn't know about this. What's funny is I have a character who's half Norman, half Gaelic, and she is no relation of Cormac. She's actually his girlfriend. So, whoops. No, I seriously.
You can read the Cormac stories of Howard. That will be.
I should.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Howard was the very best. Like I said, I think Howard planned out his stories a little better in some ways, because I set the goal, I set the beginning, and I don't know what's going on in between. And I just I try to go out. Yeah, I do the Tolkien thing. Tolkien actually said, all right, the ring will be destroyed in Mount Doom. Frodo is taking off. And then he complained he was zigzagging the entire way and doubling back and then zigzagging some more. And if you were to trace Tolkien's creative map, it looked like the map that Kronk and Isma took in The Emperor's New Groove to get to the main palace. Like, it makes no sense. But Howard, at least, like, sometimes his first draft wouldn't make sense. But what he'd do is he'd double back and edit it so carefully. And Howard generally had a good idea of how he wanted to get to the end and how he'd get there. Yet, like, Howard was a master at planning this. I think it's either Dan or my proofreader, Rachel, who have described it as a writer is a guy with a map, but typically he doesn't have a lamp to see it with, and it's his job not to get lost. So Howard is someone who remembered to bring at least a match or three. Tolkien is someone I think she described as he didn't just forget the matches, but he kind of forgot half the map. And he's traveling through a forest that he's but he doesn't.
Yeah, I've read some Tolkien. It's you get quite lost in the world.
Yeah, but currently I'm also publishing. Speaking of Tolkien, I'm also publishing some Silmarillion type stories over on Substack. And
what is your Substack, by the way? I want to share with the people.
Oh, sure. I'll put it in the chat if you want.
Yeah, put it in the chat.
Brothers Krynn. Let me just go.
There's also the book we're talking about, The Crown of Blood, as you can see in the screen, is the first novel published by Joe here and his brother Dan.
Yep.
You can get it on Amazon for, I think it's $7.50 or something right now on Kindle. You can also get the paperback for $25. You can find the link down below in the description of this video, so you don't have to do any of the work. You can just jump right into the Amazons.
I'm having troubles with commenting in the chat with the link for Substack, so I sent it to you privately.
Oh yeah, I sent it.
But
put it in.
Most of these stories are organized. Some of them aren't. I do a lot of lit analysis there. Dan wrote, for example, an essay recently on Adrian Balboa from Rocky. I wrote one on Dragon Ball about Son Goku. Before that, there was one on Padme. If you want other people's fantasy, I collect those and I post them in singular posts. And there's Darkspire Conspiracy that's being uploaded regularly there. If you want my Silmarillion type stories, which is in the Tales of Pangaea, but that's a general all-purpose thing. A lot of my poems go in there. But my Olimpnomaki story is there. That's my Silmarillion. It's about the war between the Olympian gods. And I write it in old-fashioned English, or at least as old-fashioned as I can. English is my second language, so I don't know how well I do. And I think for you, World of Conan, you'd probably like Baron Cub, which is Wolf and Cub with some Conan-like elements, and which is very brutal and starts with a murder or two. And Hrothgar, the warrior, ends up vowing vengeance, but has to protect his only surviving son, Sigewolf, as they carry out a blood feud. And yeah, Dan and I are co-writing that one because we worked on this, then we decided to do a full novel.
Oh, whoops!
Baron Cub. So we're writing a dark fantasy and sorcery novel, but very slowly. It's very serial.
Right.
In turn, Darkspire is just me. Prince of Flames is a Gone with the Wind romance, and that's just me. But the Olimpnomaki is just me. Baron Cub is Dan and I. And if anyone's curious about any of the other stories, there's also Swift Shadow Murders, which is my attempt at writing something like Ivanhoe. I'm having a lot of fun with that, but I had to put it aside for some of the other stuff for a little bit. Juxta Hero is basically Watership Down meets Redwall. It's dedicated to my puppy and turning him into a badass. And Varcola is a story that Dan wrote a little more of, and I'm kind of more like the kind of side guy and editor for it. Varcola being a horror fantasy novel. Most of these are serial novels and short stories and whatnot.
Man, you got a lot of stuff here.
Thanks. Originally, I didn't plan to write a lot of these stories, but as I was mostly doing other stuff on Substack. Then some people asked me for some of my fiction, so I published a little bit. It wasn't popular at first. Baron Cub, I mean. Then I published the first chapter of Dark Spire Conspiracy. That got very popular. And then I published the first chapter of Swift Shadow Murders. That was very popular. Prince of Flames was pretty popular by the time of the third chapter. And so it started to spiral and take on a life of its own. Now, Baron Cub, I think the first chapter was the best written, but given it didn't catch on like the others, I could be wrong. Chapter 2 and 3, I think, were a lot more popular. So it did catch on eventually. But Crown of Blood, we ended up writing in between working on all these other projects over on Substack.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Crown of Blood has some of the tighter writing than some of these stories, because these we have to get out like twice a week sometimes. But in turn, Crown of Blood was also aimed at a more Shakespearean or like linguistic kind of, even if we couldn't capture that language exactly, we wanted to capture that feel. And the feel was important. And what was also important was a darker tone. One which would be a love letter, not just to Shakespeare, but also Howard to an extent. Because the one who originally wrote dark fantasy tales, in some ways, was Howard. Yes, Tolkien did as well with his Children of Húrin and quite a few chapters in Lord of the Rings. But Howard is really what we think of. And Howard had such a passion for Celtic peoples and cultures, despite his first love really being Texas, if we're being honest. I think while Conan is a great hero, Conan does feel Celtic, but he's ultimately, like the Hyborian Age is ultimately a Texan mythology, because Conan is freedom and liberty itself personified. And that's what Texas loves. And that is Texas's core value.
Right.
While my story is trying to be Celtic, purely Celtic. But yeah, it's a love letter also to Howard. I've actually been told by the editor, chase after the Game of Thrones audience with this, because Game of Thrones fans love this stuff. And he also suggested try chasing after the Shakespeare societies and email them. But we'll see. I have tried that with some of them. I don't know. I don't think they've replied yet. But we'll see. I should actually email it to the Golden Globe over in London. Let's see how they react. Currently, we've also gotten advice to write one or two short stories into theater plays, namely The Final Supper. And
yeah, that could be it, right? Yes, if someone wanted to do a local play or something.
Yeah, and I know Don Bluth has a theater, and one of my proofreaders for a lot of my books, Ray, knows a theater company, so could be something to look at. And the thing is, like I said, maybe I'll look into that.
Yeah, like you said, you have a lot of fingers in many pies. Well, I said that.
Yeah,
but looking at your Substack and all the fantasy stuff you're doing, like you have a lot of content coming out. It's like you have 3 heads and 20 hands writing.
Well, the thing is, I get up at around 3 a.m, and the first thing I do is I write, and then work these days starts around 10, and so I'm writing for about 5-6 hours, and on days off sometimes I write till 11 or so, and then I have to take the dog out. Then I come back and there's more writing with Dan, and we edit and we work on other parts of the project. So there's we're doing a lot of work on this stuff, and we're trying to get back to the YouTube stuff, but life's been pretty crazy this past month. Hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to do some video content. I'm hoping to do a Red Sonja book club podcast. And
interesting. Why Red Sonja?
Because Roy Reads Anything, a channel we teamed up with once, read some of the Red Sonja stuff and liked book 3. And the only way we could do a podcast of Red Sonja would be if we did it on the 3rd book. That'd be the only way we could probably narrow him down for another team up. And I figure, why not? And I want to do a Red Sonja book club. I want to do some more Zelda and Warcraft content. And I'm also going to want to do I'm also going to want to do, alongside the Red Sonja, go back to my comic book reviews of Conan, at least until you, Zero, and I can sit down and do the Black Colossus. And
we have to do that. Life's been kind of crazy. But here's a good. Did you send any stories to Sword and Sorcery fan sites?
I did send Prince of Flames first chapter. It was intended as a Sword and Sorcery short story, but then I decided to turn it into a Gone with the Wind romance novel after that. But it's weird. It's part Sword and Sorcery, part romance for fun. I was poking fun at Ray because she loves, my proofreader loves romance books. So I decided to poke fun at her so that half the time it seems like it's going in a romantic direction, and it just turns into a Conan-like story where it's all about blood and gore. But
have you heard about this Savage Realms monthly? That's Sword and Sorcery fan sites. They have submissions. Just send stuff to them.
I'll send Baron Cub to them, and maybe some of the other stuff. We've got a few Sword and Sorcery stories. I've lost one story because I wrote 2 stories when I was working my previous job, and I would sit down sometimes on lunch breaks and spend more time writing. And the trouble is that I wrote it on my computer, but I can't find the file anymore. But I published the other story on Substack. And Dan and I have talked about doing, because we were originally going to do Cull fan fiction, but we have some of the scripts, some of the stories already written, like these Cull because we had dreamt of how would we do a Cull or Conan TV series, and we had a lot of story ideas and plot points written in a few scripts, but we've decided to maybe turn those into our own Sword and Sorcery stories and change them and whatnot. So maybe we're gonna take those ideas and write that into a proper story with descriptions, and maybe we'll send it to this, because honestly, I've not sent anything to a fanzine in a while, but it might be a good idea. Well, actually, it is a good idea. So, yeah, we'll have to do that.
Yeah, you can get these Savage Realms on Amazon. It's like a few dollars for one issue.
Cool.
One issue has like usually a four stories or something like that, 4 or 5 stories. So it's really cool that there's there's these Sword and Sorcery fan signs, or I'm in magazines.
Well, between Dan and I tended to go more Mark Twain, John Ronald Reuel, Tolkien. Dan goes more, like, his style a lot of times veers more towards Howard at times. So when you get us working together, you get Baron Cub and Crown of Blood. But when you get us working separately, you get me with my Brother Under the Gemstone, my Darkspire Conspiracy, and Swift Shadow Murders, and my my French series. And you've got Dan, or even my on my end, also my Olympnomachi. But Dan on his end goes more into Varcola, more into his Eric stories, which is partially a kind of Conan type character. You get more of that sort of stuff. So Dan's in some ways got a more natural gift for sword and sorcery, but Dan writes very, very slowly. Very slowly. I'm not saying that to criticize him. I'm just noting he's very careful. So in that regard, it'd be tricky, but maybe we can get something on time for one of their deadlines, and we could try submitting something.
Yeah, just you have a lot of stuff, so you can send to many places, many things, and get get your name out there, get known. But dude, like I said, congratulations on the book. I think it really looks and reads really professional, and I what I've read so far, I've really enjoyed. I can see some people might get, the Celtic language and the names. You can get kind of lost in the names in the way. I mean, in the bad sense, that they kind of feel and sense and sound similar. So you're like, wait, who's this guy? Who's that guy? Because they're quite similar, the names. But
well, thinking on that, I'm thinking maybe for Brother to the Gemstone, when I go to send it, because I keep going back and editing and changing things, but when I go to send it to the publishers, when maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'll try to grab as many of the names as possible and put them in a dramatis personae section at the beginning. And maybe I'll also have to do that for the major characters in Crown of Blood. When we go to do because this is part 1. When we finish with part 2, I'm thinking maybe I do want to re-release it as a collected, like as a assembled edition with both part 1 and part 2 in the same edition down the road as a Crown of Blood revamped. And for that, maybe we'll have to make sure we do have the maps in there. We'll have to make sure we have the glossary. We'll have to make sure.
That would be great. That would be great.
We'll have to make sure we have everything in there.
Yeah. It just helps, It's just because sometimes if there's a lot of characters with a lot of kind of similar sounding names, it's just it's natural. Your brain kind of gets way because for you it's very natural because every character and you're invested in that sense. You've written them, so in your head you can see all the characters, but for us who come like with fresh eyes and see we're gonna be like we're gonna be stuck remembering a bit.
Yeah, because like for example, that's very valid criticism because like you get Ringen, brother of Domhnall, then you have Padraig who names his son after his dad, Ringen. So you have Ringen MacPadraig, and that could probably confuse some people because you have, a grandfather who's called Ringen, then you have his grandson after he dies who's called Ringen. So you have 2 different Ringens, and this is where I do understand if that's going to be a bit of a turnoff. So I'm going to have to also see about dusting off the genealogy tree and making sure I've got that hammered out when I edit this, and make sure I've got my genealogy trees all in order and my maps in order and whatnot. We've not started work on part 2 yet because we've got all these Substack stuff. But I'll let people in on the know that Darkspire Conspiracy will hopefully be finished in June. Calidbolg's revamp and rewriting is already finished. So that leaves Darkspire Conspiracy next month. I'm going to finish that. Swift Shadow Murders will be finished the month after that. And then the idea will be that the edits on my notes for Olympnomaki will be finished. That'll be finished in August. And then we start on Crown of Blood Part 2. And hopefully we'll be able to finish that in 2-3 months.
So when are you kind of like looking, or what kind of date for the next book? Like in where
Well,
roundabouts? This at the end of this year, or
at the end of this year, I would hope so.
Right.
Because it'll take about 3 months for the writing of it. Because of the process, and also because I'm going back to school in August for plumbing, and so that would be that'll take me about 3 months to write this and second anthology. That would mean probably then we have to send it to the editor. It takes him a month to edit these things, because
that's the next one you're going to publish, or are you going to publish Darkspire before
I'm
that?
going to publish Darkspire
As a book, I mean.
I'm going to publish Darkspire and Caladbolg. But I want Caladbolg. Yeah, after those two will be published hopefully in next month. Well, Darkspire maybe in July.
No, but I mean like in book format. Are you going to do them?
Yeah, I'm looking to gather up all the chapters of.
Oh, okay. So they're going to come out before the Crown of Blood too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that because I'm working through all this on Substack, this is currently on the table. But once these other projects are off the table and are completed and sent off to the editors, well, then I've got the time to invest in the next short stories. The first short story of part 2, I'm going to want to write, but the second short story, Dan's probably going to end up writing. So I may end up pitching to him to get started around June. It'll probably take him about a month to finish it. And then once he does that, he's going to start getting into the flow of it and probably have like 2-3 short stories ready by the time I get these other projects done. Yeah,
you have a lot of books coming out. That's good.
But and thanks, Gola, for congrats on publishing the book. Yeah, this is self-published. I'm hoping all the books will be self-published up until Brother to the Gemstone, which will be half, like it'll be hybrid published. Right. Because I have an agreement with one publishing house. And the thing is, if ever I get an offer from a publisher, I have a friend over on Substack, AC Gargill. She's really great. She's a great writer, mostly of horror and romance. Not together. She tends to write them apart from each other. And the thing is, she has tried to recommend 2 publishing houses, I think, to me. And I'm considering taking Swift Shadow Murders to them, and maybe the Olympiomaki. But Crown of Blood Part 2, I don't know. If they accept the other 2 and we find a good working relationship, maybe I will take it to them, and along with the completed edition, which I'd want to publish like 2 months later or something, or 3 months later or something. It's not that I want to throw it all out there and like rush it out. It's that part 2, it's fine if it's out on its own, but I just view it as it'd be a little disrespectful to any fans who like the book that like, oh, well, you're going to have to, like you should have access down the road to both volumes in the same edition or something. And this allows me to fix up the problem with not having a map in there. Crown of Blood Part 1 will have the map soon, don't worry. Valid criticism there. I want to set up the glossary. I want to set up all these other little details. So I want to make sure I've got all this figured out. So once I figure all this out for book 2, I want to combine the 2 glossaries, put them together, do some other details like that, and maybe do a thank you section at the end of book 2, just thanking everyone. and I'm going to want to compile them almost immediately. Otherwise, I'm probably never going to get to it. So just compile it immediately, send it off, have it published, and everybody can have it. And, like, if there are fans of these books, they should be able to have both copies in one. Otherwise, it's a bit of a jerk-ass move on my part.
So the next self-published book will be the Darkspire one?
Yeah, hopefully. Yep.
It's going to be on Amazon as well?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. That novel is a love letter to, because, when I first got into mythology, it was Greek mythology, then Norse, but Norse mythology became my first love in life. I love Norse mythology, Norse sagas, the Volsungs, Sigurd, Othin. I love Othin and the Aesir. And this is my love letter to them and to Scandinavian people. And so, like, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they have such beautiful stories. And
you should read sometimes maybe the Finnish mythology.
I will. Kalevala, I believe it is. I'll have to order a copy.
It's interesting. But yeah, guys, we've been going for 2 hours. We've talked about the Crown of Blood. I think we should do. I mean, you read it, but once I get around to reading the whole thing, we could go through it and kind of review it and talk about
we could do
about the scores, and
maybe
also
story.
and have Dan on the call as well, and also when you publish the Darkspire, we can talk about that one. Talk about that one as well.
Yeah, because I'll admit, I didn't intend to at first, but Volmung actually does look like you, so I kind of messed up there.
Okay.
Him and I think it's mostly Volmung who was partially inspired by you and your mannerisms. So you might have actually been reborn as Volmung, heir of Sigurd. And
hello. It's showed up late. Oh, no worries. All you got to learn is go check out The Crown of Blood by Mr. Joe here and his brother. They've published it on Amazon, and you can get it there for some $7.50 on the Kindle, and you can get the paperback for $25. The link is in the description. Check out the sample there on Amazon. I mean, you can check it out. It's an anthology with short stories, and it's dark fantasy, quite inspired by Scotland. Would I say Scottish mythology or and all that good stuff? So go check it out. I think it's, from what I'd read so far, it's very well written.
Thank you.
Really grabs your attention. So it's short stories, so you can easily jump in, jump out. You don't have to feel like you sometimes when you start a new book or something, you feel like you have to really invest the time in it to see where the story goes, and sometimes you feel like you don't have the time or the energy, and if it doesn't grab you immediately, it's like kind of like it sits on the shelf, so to speak, and you drift off to some other book or something else. But here it's good because it's short stories, so you can just start with one story and let it grab you and read it for 10-20 minutes, how long it takes to read the first story, and then go on from there to see it, how much you like it or how much you do not like it. But I would definitely recommend to check this out because it was I'm digging it, and I'm recommending it definitely.
Okay.
So
yeah, and hopefully we've also been suggested real quick to make merch for it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have merch for Padraig. That was our editor, who's very biased for Padraig because of that one scene. And we were advised to go to the guy who's going to do the cover art for Darkspire, because the guy's a genius. He's a genius artist, and we were advised to go to him and get him to do some art for merch. So hopefully we'll have some shirts and other merch out for everyone soon.
You hear it here, folks. The Chaput Empire has begun. It will makes all the tendrils go out all over the world, and you will find merch at your local grocery store in no time. But any closing words, Joe?
Make Aqualonia great again is the best.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I still have my shirt.
I should have.
It's in my closet. I would have worn it, but I got swept up today by other stuff. But my favorite shirt. Seriously, check out the merch store. Make Aqualonia great again is the best shirt ever. And I'll also say more people should subscribe to this channel, because this is one of the best Conan channels out there. And we'll be doing a lot of Black Colossus stuff.
We should definitely start that. And
hey, if you want, you could join Dan and I for our Red Sonja book club.
Yeah, Red Sonja doesn't really inspire me.
Okay,
I'm just gonna be frank here. Like, Red Sonja is kind of my least favorite characters of the
Howard. Go back to Call then.
Of the Howard universe, so to speak.
It's always Call.
Yeah.
But Dan and I will be doing also content on Crown of Blood over on our channel, Brothers Krynn.
Definitely go subscribe to the Brothers Krynn and the Brothers Hyborian, guys.
Yeah, you can check out our Substack as well, where we write just about every kind of fantasy we could think of. So from fantasy romance, fantasy horror, fantasy Redwall style stuff, fantasy Ivanhoe's kind of stuff, to more Nordic fantasy, to epic poems. You name it, we've probably written it, so, or something like it. So hopefully soon, once we finish this crop of short stories, serial novels, we'll be starting a new crop down the road.
Yeah.
Because once you start writing, you can't stop.
Yeah. So any final words on the book you just released?
Buy The Crown of Blood. It's a very bloody story. It's very bloody, which means it's glorious. And it's a journey of how Simon's trying to make Caledonia great again. And I'll actually finish with one thing. Remember, 3 kingly lines, 1 crown.
Oh, yeah. You can see there's going to be problems.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's good to end it here. We're gone for 2 hours now, and I just want to thank all the watchers, all the guys who've been watching here. Thanks, all guys, for your attention. And we had some technical difficulties there in the beginning.
Yeah.
But thanks for sticking with us and listening to us, and definitely go subscribe to the Brothers Krynn and go check out that book on Amazon. You can check out the sample there. Very easy to do. And support indie fantasy. And just, support good stories. That's what it's all about. So I don't know. There's not much else to say. I guess we'll see you on the next World of Conan video live stream. And I'll just say, wish you well, guys. All right.
Hail.
Goodbye. Hails.